Good morning. We're here on this Tuesday morning for a blessing from the bridge from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7. As we've been working our way through the Sermon on the Mount, and we come to verses 15 to 20. Do you remember the story, the children's story of Little Red Riding Hood? It is a European fairy tale. And it has a few different versions, but basically it was written, I think, originally by Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. Their parents named them well because they wrote Grimm stories for kids, and this is just about the grimmest. In the unlikely event that you never heard it or read it or just need a refresher, let me briefly tell you the story. The story is of a little girl named Red Riding Hood, called Red Riding Hood because her mother had bought her this beautiful red coat with a hood. And her mother tells her to go to her grandmother's house through the woods and bring her some food and some drink because she's sick. And her mother warns her not to speak to strangers along the way. And so Little Red Riding Hood sets out, and she meets a wolf in the woods. And forgetting her mother's counsel, she starts to talk to the wolf and tell the wolf where she's going and that she has some food for grandma. And the wolf is just ravenous. The wolf is hungry. And so the wolf runs ahead to grandmother's house, swallows her grandmother in one bite, and then crawls into bed and pretends to be the grandmother. So when Little Red Riding Hood gets there, she notices that grandmother looks different. And so she says, "Grandmother, what big eyes you have." And the wolf says, "All the better to see you with, my dear." And then she says, "Well, what big ears you have." And the wolf says, "All the better to hear you with, my dearie." And then finally, "What big teeth you have, Grandma." And the wolf says, "All the better to eat you with," and then swallows Little Red Riding Hood in one gulp. Well, the hero of the story, at least in one of the versions, is a hunter who comes by and realizes what has happened and sees the wolf's big belly and cuts the wolf's belly open, and out come Grandma and Little Red Riding Hood, no worse for wear. And so it has a happy ending for a very weird happy ending. So that's the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Now I want to read to you the verses for this morning from Matthew chapter 7, verses 15 to 20. See if you see any similarity. Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits." So a good tree bears good fruit. A diseased tree bears diseased fruit or bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a diseased tree cannot bear good fruit. Any tree that bears bad fruit is gathered up and thrown into the fire. Therefore, you will recognize them by their fruits. Now, in those verses, there is both a picture and a principle. The picture is very similar to the one in Little Red Riding Hood. The picture is of a ravenous wolf who dresses up in sheep's clothing, in disguise. The principle also is very similar to that in the story. Be careful. Be careful. Jesus is warning us to be careful about those false prophets who would lead us away from Jesus, whether they're friends or teachers or pastors, or whether they are things in your life that just lead you away from Jesus or become a substitute for Jesus. In our Bible study, we've been talking about idols. One of the churches in Revelation chapter 2 struggled with idols and false gods. And we've been talking about what those are in our culture, things like materialism sexual sin or ambition or our jobs. So whatever it is that leads you away from Jesus is in effect a false prophet. So beware, be careful of those things. Very similar to the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Now, the big question for us is, how do you tell the difference between a true prophet and the teachings of Jesus and a false prophet? Well, Jesus tells us twice how to do that. He says, you will recognize them by their fruits. So if you have any question about someone or something that's leading you away, first of all, you need to know the gospel. You need to know the teachings of Jesus, so you'll know when you're being led away from those. But then if it's a person, look at that person. The way he or she talks or treats other people or treats yourself, the way they live their lives, the way they view the church and worship, and of course, the way they view the Lord Jesus himself. So be careful. Be careful the way you walk today, that you walk in the way of Jesus, and be careful of those who don't, that you won't be led away with them. So God bless your Tuesday. Tomorrow we have Bible study at 7 o'clock. Would love to have you there. You'll get an invite on your flock note. And if you're not already on our flock note, you don't receive it, message me, let me know, call me, and I will make sure you get on the list. Have a great Tuesday.